even a trace of you.
Okay.
Jury selection is now underway in one of the most controversial local murder cases in recent history. David Camm.
David Camm.
David Camm.
David Camm.
David Camm.
This is David Camm and his wife, Kimberly Camm. David and Kim both grew up in the city of New Albany, Indiana. The two met in 1984, and Kim became David's second wife in 1989. Shortly after the wedding, also in 1989, David Camm went on to apply to work for the Indiana State Police. He was accepted and eventually went on to become a police officer for the state as part of the Emergency Response Unit. A few years later, in 1993, David and Kim went on to have their first child together, Bradley Camm. This was Kim's first child, but it was actually David's second since he had a daughter with his ex-wife before Kim. Things appeared to be going great for the small Camm family, until David began having an affair. This affair caused major stress on the relationship, and David eventually moved out of the home that he was living in with Kim and Bradley, and moved in with his mistress. A short amount of time passed, and the new living arrangement came to an end. David and Kim communicated about the marital issues and decided to work on the marriage again. David then moved back into the family home with his wife and son. Just 1 year after moving back in, Kim became pregnant with her second child, and in 1995, their new daughter, Jill Camm, was born. That same year, David and Kim decided that they were going to purchase a new home together on Lockhart Road, and so the construction of the home began. They chose this location due to a connection that the road had with David's family. Lockhart Road was actually named after some of David's direct family members on David's mother's side. Over the next few years, up until about 1999, it appeared as though things had been going quite well for the Camm family. Kim began a new job working for an insurance company where she apparently excelled and was making a very comfortable income, while David resigned from the Indiana State Police Department and began to work for a basement waterproofing company which was owned by his uncle, where he apparently was making substantially more money. The kids were performing well in school, and despite David's resignation, David stayed close with most of the officers that he was previously working with, hosting barbecues and parties where most of which would attend. While everything appeared to be too good to be true, a disturbing series of events had been manifesting behind the scenes. On September 28th of the year 2000, around 7 p.m., David Camm began playing a basketball game at a local church rec center, something he would do every week on Thursday. While David played, Kim would pick up the kids from their Thursday activities and return home, which was the usual routine. After the basketball game had finished, David headed home around 9:20 p.m. He lived about 4 minutes away from the rec center and was actually rushing home because the game lasted a little longer than usual and David was worried that Kim would be upset. As he arrived home, he used his garage door remote to open the garage so he could pull in. But as the garage door opened, David fell witness to a disturbing crime scene. He first witnessed his wife lying on the floor of the garage with what appeared to be a gunshot wound to her head and a pool of blood running along the garage floor. Above where she was lying, the passenger door of her black Ford Bronco was left open. David could not tell if his children were in the vehicle at first glance, so David ran to the open door and looked towards the back seat. He then found both Jill and Bradley in the back seat of the Bronco in a similar condition. Due to David's history as a police officer, David was able to make a quick determination that Kim and Jill were both likely beyond the point of rescue, but he wasn't so sure about Bradley. He felt that Bradley was warm to the touch, so he pulled Bradley from the car and began to apply first aid and CPR. When this did not appear to be working, David Camm immediately called his prior place of employment, the Indiana State Police Department.
Indiana State Police Radio, Patrice, can I help you?
Patrice, it's Dave Camm. Let me talk to Post Command right now.
Okay, he's on another line.
Right now, let me talk to Post Command.
Hold on.
Dave? Get everybody out here to my house now. Okay, all right. My wife and my kids are dead. Get everybody out here to my house. Go to Dave Camm's house now. Everything's going to be okay, all right? We're going to get people. Everything's not okay. Get everybody out here now. They're coming. Go to Dave Camm's house now. Okay.
David Camm then ran to his uncle's house, who lived directly across the street and was also a former police officer. David's uncle then went with David back to the house where he found the crime scene. David was acting hysterical, so his uncle then forcefully removed David from the garage while they waited for the officers to arrive. The police arrived around 9:30 p.m. and found that all three victims had been fatally shot. Kim was not wearing any pants, so it appeared as though she may have been sexually assaulted. Jill and Brad appeared as though they may have been collateral damage due to being a witness to the murder of Kim Camm. Above the open passenger door, investigators found Kim's shoes neatly placed on the roof side by side. Lying next to Bradley in the back seats, investigators found a sweater with the word backbone written on the inside of the collar. Due to the nature of the crime scene, a homicide investigation immediately began. Many of the officers working the case consisted of individuals that David Camm once considered as close friends, if not family. One of David's very close friends became lead investigator of the case, and just like what would happen in most other homicide cases, the spouse would be immediately questioned about what happened. So David was then interviewed, but he was not immediately considered a suspect or a person of interest.
I'm here at the Indiana State Police Post, and also present is David Camm. We're going to try and find out what happened here, so we can bring that person to justice as best we know how. Do it right. Right. Exactly. For everyone asks.
David went on to explain his entire day, providing a timeline of events as well as a strong alibi that he was actually playing basketball with friends at the church rec center. He would also go on to do his best to break down Kim's likely timeline of events, including the times that she would be picking up the children and likely arriving at home. David stated that he believes Kim would have arrived at home sometime around 7:30 p.m., but closer to 7:40. He would state that Kim had zero enemies and that he can't think of anyone that would have a motive or reason to want to hurt her. He did say that he noticed one thing that he thought was very odd, and that was that Kim's shoes were neatly placed on the roof of her vehicle near where she lied in the garage. David was adamant that this was or would be very unusual for Kim to do on her own. David also mentioned that he believed the murders must have happened within the first few minutes of them arriving home, as Jill and Bradley were still in the car. After this initial interview, and as a formality, the police then decided to take David Camm's clothing to the lab to be properly tested. Just 3 days later, on October 1st, 2000, David Camm was contacted by law enforcement and asked to come in for another interview. This time, the officers that once thought of David as a close friend now began to believe that he was possibly a murderer.
Because of the high profile of this case, and because of, obviously, as you know well, the notoriety, we're doing this all by the numbers. People heard something they thought was unusual. When we talked to them, they said it sounded like gunfire. The time was when you were already home, which was around 9:20, shortly thereafter. I'm just telling you what we,
It's wrong. It's
are
wrong.
these people making up this time?
I'm telling you, people are confused. The time element is off.
There's blood on your shirt, and they'll have a DNA analyzed. This is the presumptive test that it is high-velocity blood spatter. It's scientific documentation. The only way that comes on is from blowback or blowout from a gunshot wound.
That is supposed to be on my t-shirt that I play ball in. It's on you. It's wrong, Daryl.
Dave,
Guys,
what do we do when they tell us that? Now we got to figure out
you
why.
better find another expert.
She was molested. It happened that day, that night. That's when it happened. And it wasn't by me. You guys are wrong here. You're wrong, Mickey. I did not do this. I did not do this.
Who did do it?
I don't know. That's why I called you guys. That's what your job, that's what you're supposed to be doing. You're looking so hard at me.
We look at everybody, Dave, but honestly,
But Mickey, you're so off base. You're so wrong. You're so wrong, Mickey.
tried to clean this up. Tried to clean some of the blood up or something like that.
No. This is ridiculous.
What about some bleach, Dave?
No. It's not right. It's not right. It's not right. It's not right, guys. You're not right. You're wrong. You're wrong. You're wrong, Daryl. You're wrong.
Well,
This is not right. You're getting off the track. Something's not right here. Now fix it.
It turns out that a member of the crime scene investigation unit had observed David's clothing and believed that he had blood on his shirt that was consistent with close-range blood spatter, also known as high-velocity blood mist, which likely came from a gunshot. The police also spoke with one of David's neighbors, who claimed that she had heard 3 very loud pop noises that she believed were likely gunshots between 9:15 and 9:30 p.m., which is around the exact time that David would have arrived home from basketball. The police also believed that they discovered signs of an attempted but not successful cleanup of the crime scene, as well as what medical experts stated appeared to be trauma caused by sexual assault to David's daughter Jill. Immediately following this interrogation, David Camm was then arrested and charged for the murder of his family on October 1st, 2000. After several months went by and David remained in police custody, the prosecution began to work on building their case against David, including creating a likely timeline of events. David's trial then began on January 14th, 2002. And David Camm pled not guilty. The prosecution went on to present their case against David, stating that although they initially believed that David committed the murders of his family between 9:15 and 9:30 p.m., the autopsy came back to state that the deaths definitely occurred between 7:30 and 8 p.m., which led to an entirely new timeline. The prosecution then went on to state that they believed that while David Camm was playing basketball, which started at 7 p.m., that he likely snuck away from the game and left the rec center and drove 4 minutes home. He quickly committed the murders and then drove 4 minutes back and continued to play basketball. They stated that this scenario is entirely accurate since they located a phone call from David's landline phone to a customer that took place at exactly 7:19 p.m. They stated that the crime scene was then staged by David when he arrived home from basketball, attempting to make it look like a home invasion or possible robbery, where the assailant then assaulted his wife and murdered his family. They also stated that they believed that David's time as an ex-police officer was enough to help him figure out how to make this entire crime look as though it was committed by somebody other than himself. This includes the staging of the crime scene, as well as the potential basketball game alibi. The prosecution also went on to state that David had a history of being a poor husband and likely an emotional abuser, due to the affair that David had 6 years earlier, in 1994. They also used a witness statement from one of Kim's friends that Kim had told her that history was repeating itself, leading the friend to believe that David may have been going back to his cheating ways. Due to this, the prosecution had around 14 women testify that David Camm had been speaking to them inappropriately, flirting with them, having sexual relations with them, or even just fooling around with them during the years that David was a police officer. Finally, the prosecution also had a medical examiner testify regarding the injuries that were found on Jill, which were likely caused by a sexual assault around the time that she was discovered. The case against David Camm was beginning to look very solid. However, the defense had a relatively strong argument for each claim against David. The defense argued that the phone call that took place at 7:19 p.m. actually took place at 6:19 p.m., immediately before David left for basketball, which David had actually previously admitted to. They had a technician from Verizon testify during trial that this was certainly the case, due to a discrepancy in the two time zones that both occur in Indiana. It appears as though the customer that David was speaking with was actually in a time zone that is 1 hour ahead, despite living in the same state, which caused the confusion over the call. They had 11 people that were at David's basketball game testify that David did not leave the rec center at any moment during the game, and that the idea that he committed the murder mid-game seemed ridiculous. The defense argued that the crime scene had relatively no signs of a staging, and that the beliefs that the blood appeared to be partially cleaned up was not accurate, and that the blood had a slightly strange appearance due to the drying process. They also argued that any of the blood spatter found on David's clothing would have most likely been from David removing Bradley from the vehicle to perform CPR, as well as him potentially accidentally rubbing along Jill's hair while in the process of moving Bradley. The defense had very little to combat the 14 witnesses that made claims against David's loyalty to Kim. However, they did have several witnesses testify that David had appeared to have been on a long-time upswing with the relationship since the initial affair, which happened in 1994, and it appeared as though the family was very happy. Finally, the defense also pointed out that despite the intensive searches of the home, a murder weapon was never discovered. Both the prosecution and the defense presented a solid case regarding the evidence surrounding the murders of Kim, Jill, and Bradley. However, on March 17, 2002, David Camm was found guilty and sentenced to 195 years in prison for the murder of his family. David Camm immediately filed to appeal his conviction, and just over 2 years later, in August of 2004, the Court of Appeals agreed with David Camm's new defense team that the 14 women that testified against David should not have taken place and should have been ruled as inadmissible. The conviction of David Camm was then overturned until his upcoming retrial. During the years between the first and second trial, David's attorneys decided to focus their defense on 2 articles of evidence that had been virtually ignored during the first trial. The first piece of evidence being the gray sweater with the word backbone written on the inside of the collar, and the second piece being the shoes placed neatly on the roof of Kim's Ford Bronco. The defense team first had this sweater retested for any DNA, since it had been approximately 3 years since the initial testing, and they had hoped that a new profile would have been entered into the system. The DNA immediately came back with a new match. This time, the profile matched a man with the name Charles Backbone Bonnet. Charles had previously spent 7 years behind bars for a handful of crimes against women, including physical and sexual assault, as well as armed robbery. Charles received the nickname Backbone while he was in prison, and Charles was actually out on parole at the time that the murders took place. Charles Bonnet also had another nickname, the Shoe Bandit, due to the fact that he had been charged many times for attacking and stealing shoes from multiple women. As it turned out, Charles Bonnet had a shockingly intense foot fetish, also known as foot partialism or podophilia.
Well, I mean, it's clearly that in my youth, yes, I did have a foot fetish, and I've been intrigued by women's feet.
This connected Charles to the awkward placing of Kim's shoes at the crime scene, as well as several injuries found on Kim's feet. This also, quite obviously, connected Charles to the sweater with the nickname Backbone written on the inside of the collar. Weirdly, the DNA of Charles Bonnet was already in the system at the time of the original investigation, which means there would have been a match many years earlier. When the prosecution found out about this new discovery, they claimed they must have accidentally sent the wrong sample in for testing. Anyways, in March of 2005, Charles Bonnet was then brought in for questioning regarding the new evidence that the defense team had uncovered.
That sweatshirt is in the middle of a crime scene of a triple homicide. Somehow that sweatshirt got there, your sweatshirt. You explain to me how it got there.
I have no idea.
It shows up at a crime scene, not laundered, not washed. If it went through the Salvation Army drop box, that would have been a clean sweatshirt. Your DNA, chances are, probably wouldn't have been on there. But it is.
I see where you're coming from.
You know David Camm?
No.
You ever met David Camm?
No.
Do you remember the murder of David Camm's family?
On television, yes.
Do you know where David Camm lives?
Only on television.
Make no mistake about it. If anything else links you to it, you're done. Stick a fork in you.
And see, that would normally worry me. I wasn't there.
Charles would deny any involvement in the murders of Kim, Jill, and Bradley. He would also completely deny that he knew who David Camm was and that he had never met him or been to his house, until 2 weeks later, when more evidence was reviewed and a new partial palm print was discovered on the side of the Bronco. It was then ran through the database, and this palm print came back to match Charles Bonnet. Charles Bonnet was then interviewed again, immediately following this discovery. This time, Charles went on to claim that he and David actually did know each other and would frequently play basketball together. Charles then stated that the only involvement he had the night of the murders was to meet up with David and sell him a gun. Charles then continued to completely deny any involvement in the murders, stating that immediately following the sale, he witnessed David Camm murder Kim, Jill, and Bradley.
Met him on the day of the murders, and what happened?
That's when I showed him the weapon.
And what did he say?
That he approved of it. He went into the house, I was still outside, but when I heard that pop, I'm shocked.
What happened then?
I hear a second shot.
You hear any children making any noise at that time?
I recall him saying, "Daddy." I heard a third pop. I remember tripping over the shoes, so that's when I would have placed them on top. I remember looking into the back seat. I didn't see any movement from anybody.
And you got in your car and you left.
And I know that I left that sweatshirt there.
Both David Camm and Charles Bonnet were then immediately arrested and charged with all 3 murders, as well as conspiracy to commit the murders. They were then both tried separately. Due to the blood spatter being found on David Camm's shirt and not on Charles Bonnet's sweater, the prosecution believed that David Camm was definitely in the room during the murder of his family. Despite the same arguments being presented that refuted the claims against David's involvement in the murders, as well as the new suspect's connection to the case via his foot fetish and previous crimes being strikingly similar, both David Camm and Charles Bonnet were found guilty of the murders as well as the conspiracy to commit the murders. It seemed that Charles Bonnet created a story believable enough to convince a jury that David Camm was at very least involved in perpetrating the crime in some way. Charles Bonnet was sentenced to 225 years, while David Camm was sentenced to life without parole. David's defense team reacted in the same way as they did after the first conviction, and David's attorneys immediately filed another appeal. And in June of 2009, a judge ruled that David Camm would now return to court for a third time, citing that there was a lack of evidence that David Camm had committed any assaults on his wife or daughter, despite a prosecution presenting that as true during the second trial. David's third trial began in August of 2013, and this time the prosecution would claim that David Camm committed the murders because he was trying to get his hands on Kimberly's life insurance. They would state that David used his history as an officer to set up Charles Bonnet as the fall guy for the crimes, and that Charles' story was likely the truth of the matter. They even had Charles Bonnet testify against David in court, where Charles would then bring forward a new accusation that David also tried to murder him that night, but he was unable to when the gun malfunctioned. Apparently, this is when David ran inside the house, and Charles ran through the garage. Charles stated that that's when he found the bodies. He moved the shoes and took off the sweater and then made a run for it. Charles stated that he did not touch or move any of the bodies. And, unfortunately for Charles, the cross-examination caught him in a web of lies. Touch DNA was found on the bodies and clothing of Kim and Jill, including Kim's underwear and both Kim and Jill's shirts. It was also found on Kim's broken fingernail. When Charles was asked about David's vehicle, Charles testified a completely different make or color. And when Charles was questioned about David's clothing, he guessed the wrong outfit. It seems the prosecution made a horrible choice by having Charles Bonnet testify. And after the jury deliberated for a short 10 hours, David Camm was found totally innocent of the murders of Kim, Jill, and Bradley Camm on October 4th, 2013, after serving 13 years behind bars.
After 2 convictions and 13 years behind bars for the murders of his wife and 2 children, David Camm walks out of an Indiana courthouse tonight. He is a free man. Good evening to you. I'm Rick Van Hoos.
I'm Vicki Dorch. As the judge read the jury's decision of not guilty, David Camm exploded in tears and bellowed loudly in the courtroom.
Vicki, all we know for sure is he is with family tonight. He was released into their custody fairly quickly today. For family, they have stood by him all these years proclaiming his innocence. Today is about joy and relief to them, while for the family of Kim Camm, it is devastating. For the first time, David Camm left the Boone County Courthouse a free man, handcuffs gone. He said nothing and showed no reaction to his new status. But just minutes before, inside the courtroom, an emotional Camm broke down sobbing at the jury's not guilty verdict.
It was almost like the emotions I saw that night, only in a different way. The night I was over there when I saw David rolling on the ground and wailing and weeping over his family, he was weeping that way today for joy, is the way I looked at it.
Just completely overwhelmed. Well, what can you say after being in up 13 years for something that you know you didn't do?
Why did he want me there at the crime scene? We know why. Because he wanted me to take the blame for all of this.
You think about him every day? Yeah. I dream about him every night.